Right.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for Daughters of Memory, Wines of the Muses. We're just sorry, we're all kind of coming right home from work here. Unfortunately, Dana tore his ACL or his MCL or his PCL or something and won't be able to join us tonight. Actually, he just has an important work meeting, so he unfortunately we're down a player today. So we'll do our best to make up for it, but. We're really excited to have all of you here. Looks like some familiar faces and some new faces. So for those of you who haven't joined us for one of these before, we're going to go through. We have 3 club wines as usual, and then we have 2 special offer wines, which some of you may have picked up from us. Very excited to share those with you as well. So we're going to go through each one of the wines individually. One of us will take kind of a lead role and explain, a little bit of background of the wine, and then give some ideas on it, and we'll kind of share it around. Feel free at any point to raise a hand or throw something in the chat, and we'll try to address it. We'll also leave plenty of time for comments at the end of the talk. Just because I know we've corresponded with all of you and your wine club, but thought it might be nice just to say a couple of words about each of us and where we are. So I'm tuning in here from Honolulu, Hawaii, where I teach, and that's why it's still late here. And I really had to run home from work. Teach Latin here, and then of course I'm involved in this project as well. So Ryan T, do you want to say a word or two just about where you are and what you're up to?
Sure. Yeah. So we're actually, it's actually light here now because it's daylight savings. We're here in San Pablo, California, and just kind of the north part of the Bay Area there. So I am coming into the Ancient Wine Guys as kind of the wine side of things, whereas Dana and Jeff bring the archaeological historical backgrounds. I spent about 10 years in the wine industry myself, and as a wine buyer, looking for wine importers, distributors, marketing, all these kinds of things. It's also where I met T and where I met Jeff and Dana as well. So this wine retail component actually was where we all met. For those of you who don't know our origin story, that's actually where we all met, working at a wine shop together.
In Berkeley.
In Berkeley, that's right.
Hi everyone, I'm T. I'm also part of more of the wine side of things for Ancient Wine Guys. I've been in wine industry for over 10 years. I still work in the restaurant industry part-time. Also, I'm a historian by training, but not learning more about archaeology. When we get to more recent, more modern topics, such as wines of the Crusade or wines of the Napoleonic Wars, I'll weigh in more on the write-ups.
We have a few clips to go through before we get there, but I think we could probably land there sometime soon. Yeah. So we're gonna kind of jump into the wines here one by one, as Jeff said, and then we'll taste through. And it's a really wonderful club. I really love this club. I'm just going to say just a quick bit about the Muses and the name of this club. Something I think I was rereading through the write-ups, and I realized that we didn't actually mention this memory component. And so the Muses are actually the daughters of Zeus and the goddess of memory. Her name is Mnemosyne. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, on the pronunciation there. I think that's correct. But one of the things that I found super compelling about this club and this concept of memory is that I believe it's actually in Hesiod's Theogony, this kind of origin creation myth of the Greek pantheon of the Greek gods, is that you have the kind of the stated purpose, if you will, of the Muses as they're kind of serving to make us forget these troubles, these hard times, these stresses, and by inspiring us to create these pieces of art, these poems, this music, this dance, theater, these sorts of things. I just thought that was a really just like a really profound sensation, because here we are talking about beautiful wines, talking about art, talking about mythology, literature, and these are things that help us de-stress, help us forget in a way, but to look past these kind of really tough times that we've been going through for the last couple of years, and to be able to really refocus on what's important. And so, yeah, it's just something that I kind of picked up as a through line as we were looking through this club, and something that I just thought it was worth mentioning. So thanks to everybody for joining us in forgetting a little bit. So T, do you want to kick us off with the first wine of the night here?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first wine, and the only white wine of the set this time, it's a Malagousia, made in, well, let me just start off by giving a little history of Malagousia. This grape was actually almost lost to time. Speaking of memory, it was discovered in 1970s by Vasilis Logothidis. He's a professor of enology, and they found it just like many wine varieties that are rediscovered, just growing wild in a village in central Western Greece. And so he found it, he wasn't sure what it was. He brought it back and they started doing experimental plantings with it, grafting it onto new rootstock. And they found its own separate variety. It's never been documented before, and they started growing it. Actually, at Porto Caris, some of you might remember that wine from our previous club. Porto Caris makes also another rediscovered rare variety, Limnio. So I think
more on that later.
Yeah, more on that later. So then, as a result, Malagousia started becoming planted more around Greece, and it's kind of known to have a really nice aromatic quality, kind of white flowers, peach blossoms, but a lot of lemon notes. But this one, it's actually one of my favorite Malagousia Ryan I ever tasted. It's grown right on the foothills of Mount Olympus by Domaine Zafeirakis. Really beautiful wine. I think it's all organically farmed, single vineyard from this vineyard called the Old Mill, probably because there was an old mill there. Vinified in stainless steel tanks, just to keep the freshness of it. And what I really like about this is some Malagousias, especially if it's grown inland or really hot climate, can get a little bit oily and unctuous and a little bit rich. Kind of imagine something like a Roussan or Marsanne. Viognier sometimes. But this one manages to be really light on its feet. And I get really good, almost like a nice minerality of it, almost like a little bit of saline quality, and it still has that characteristic Malagousia tasting notes to it. Just little white flowers, white peaches, perfumey,
but not like overly done. I think when we tasted this wine, we were both absolutely blown away. We were literally tasting it like it was that moment you look up at the glass, like, are you getting what I'm getting? And that sort of experience of for me, we don't taste relatively that many Greek wines in the grand scheme of things, and this is something that stood out to me as like a really versatile, dry, crisp white wine that still it has that body and texture, but it doesn't go ever into that direction where you're like, okay, is this like a cocktail wine? No, it's something that's really eminently pairable with foods. And I mean, when I first tasted it, I was like, wow, this is like a floral Chablis, because of that streak of acidity that runs through it. Really, really nice. Nice balance between like acidity and kind of aromatic expression.
And it really does have that whetstone quality. I think this is what people mean in the wine industry when they're like whetstone. You're like, what is whetstone? And it's just that quality, of river rocks after rain, I would say.
I mean,
next time you go hiking.
Petrichor. I mean, that's, you can feel that on the back palate there.
Yeah.
Really. So what would you pair this with?
I think this would be really great with light seafood dishes, shrimp, or like grilled shrimp, grilled branzino, or something that's like poached, like just vegetables that are like poached in olive oil as well. Like I think, like, sometimes think like red bell peppers that slightly grilled, but then it's finished with some oil. Fresh,
something fresh.
Even like a lighter summer stew or something. Like I could see tomato soup or something with this.
Sounds good to me. You haven't had dinner yet, right?
No,
me neither. No.
Yeah, it's got that kind of, like you mentioned, T. It's and Ryan, the body of it, it gives it kind of the heft to stand up to something a little bit bigger than just like a Chablis. You'd want something with a very crisp, like high acidic wine, vegetables or kind of lean seafood. But this has that. It does have that kind of crossover quality, I think. Where you could put it with chicken stew or something like that as well. So
yeah, I see Don chiming in the chat there. Spinach and goat cheese salad. That's about as perfect as it's gonna get. I mean, for stuff you have on hand, I mean, you could throw a little feta in there as well if you want to go Greek, but absolutely, yeah, that'd be classic. Yeah, Jeff, this is the first time you're trying this wine, right?
Actually,
all these wines.
Yeah. So I'm drinking these as is my want when we do these tastings. I'm drinking these out of little vials which the guys kindly sent over. So for some of these, this is my first time. It's kind of a different experience, but
yeah,
hard to get these wines in Hawaii. So
well, to continue the theme of extremely rare Greek varieties, which actually looking down the line here actually continues throughout this entire tasting, with one exception of one of the wines is from Cyprus, not Greece. But the next wine we have here, 2019, from a winery called Diamantis, their Magoutes Vineyard, Maschomavro. So this is a single vineyard wine made from 100% from the Maschomavro grape from northern Greece. We're going from Thessaly, kind of in central Western Greece, to up to Macedonia in northern Greece. And this is a wine where, again, we have a very similar story here, where this was a grape that was actually translates to black muscat, which it does not taste like muscat to me at all. But if there's some genetic genealogical heritage link there, I don't really see the muscat link. It's possible that it could be a distant cousin and has lost some of that that muscat-like character, however. But this is, again, a grape that was essentially extinct until the winemaker at Diamantis, he found the grape as a blending grape, where people were making tossing a little bit into rosé or using it actually to strengthen or bulk up Mavro, which is a pretty well-known grape in Macedonia and in northern Greece, for being kind of a fuller bodied, almost kind of like more kind of cab-like sort of red grape there. But this grape I think was used again to fill out some of the fruitier takes on the wine, a little bit more texture, a little bit more softness. In this case here, we have a wine that again, this was another one of those moments when T and I are tasting it. We'd never, of course, had a Maschomavro before, because this is the only 100% Maschomavro being produced. There are no other producers making 100% dry red version of this wine. So T and I were tasting this wine, and of course, everything's relative in the world of wine. We're saying, well, what does this remind us of? Because we can't compare it to another Maschomavro. So we're thinking, like, what is this like? And it really, just jumping out of the glass, and like if I was blind tasting it, I'd be thinking, this is Italian. Yeah. That would be my first guess. And then I'm thinking, okay, is it a Sangiovese, Nebbiolo? You get these kind of like bright, crunchy red cherry fruits, a lot of kind of
good acidity,
vibrant acidity to it as well. This is a all limestone soils here. So this is up on the slopes of the mountain in kind of northern Macedonia, northwestern Macedonia. And it's rocky, it is windswept, it snows up there. And so for me, this is almost a little bit like a Langhe Nebbiolo with a little bit more density to the fruit. I really like the texture and the kind of this like light, effortless sort of quality on the palate, but there is tannin, there is structure to this wine. And it's something that I found really, really compelling. And it's just unique. And wines like this, they keep kind of bringing me back to this golden age that we were in of Greek wine. On the first page of the write-ups of the club this month, we did a little sidebar about the kind of this newfound golden age of Greek wine. And wines like this, I think, are just a textbook example of what's going on in Greece. You have winemakers who are rediscovering ancient varieties that have been there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And they may have been just, my grandfather had a small plot of it, we just always blended it in, no one thought about it. And now they're actually taking clonal selections or massal selections. They're taking clippings essentially from the vines that they like and making vineyards out of them to then propagate into a quantity that you can actually make a wine out of. So we're seeing this beautiful renaissance in Greek wine right now, and this entire lineup, I mean, really is really, I think, kind of exemplifying that change.
It's just a really exciting time for Greek wines. Just for all of us wine drinkers and everyone in the industry, just to learn about having pure single varieties of grapes you've never heard about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and made well too.
Right. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not a very barnyardy kind of like, funky sort of thing that has kind of been made without a thought for quality. This is something that is refined, and so I think it's a really really exciting wine. When it comes to like pairings, also very versatile table. For me, I'm thinking just grill up some pork sausages, root vegetables, something like that. Anything I would do with a Nebbiolo or a good Chianti or something like that as well. Ragu. I just keep going back to like pork sausage. Anything grilled over fire.
What do you think of this wine, Jeff?
It's amazing. I love it. I mean, it what you said about just northern. It reminds me a lot of just northern Italian, particularly kind of northwestern Italian, high elevation. A lot of those grapes we love, like Grignolino, even a little Rossese is grown lower elevation, but it reminds me of that kind of the body and the nose. I love it. Nebbiolo as well, I could see. Great, super interesting. We tend to love these. We love all the wines we work with, but we tend to love these kind of lighter body wines that really punch above their weight, I think is kind of how I would describe it. It's great. I love it. Really good. And I mean, just looking at the price too, we're talking about Greek wines, but I mean, what you can get for the price you can get Greek wines for still is really pretty remarkable.
Yeah. And just catching up on the chat here, Mike Wendy, I think talking about the Malagousia said reminds us of limoncello. Absolutely, that kind of like almost like candied lemon peel sort of thing going on there. I 100% totally get that. And then Don chiming in with reminds me of Nerello Mascalese from Mount Etna. Absolutely. I mean that's Nerello Mascalese and Nerello Cappuccio, the kind of the two grapes that you see on Mount Etna. Grown on in that case more on acidic soils with the volcanic soils there, but there is still kind of there's that tension between softness and acidity that you see in both limestone and in highly volcanic soils that make those wines really, really compelling. And for me, Nerello Mascalese also is like the more compelling, the more interesting of the two between Mascalese and Nerello Cappuccio. Cappuccio, as I understand it, is typically more used for kind of like the muscle, a little bit the darker sort of burly aspects of a typical Etna Rosso blend, which would feature those two grapes typically.
Don, I think that's a really good call on Nerello Mascalese because also the color too.
Yeah.
This kind of Etna can have a lighter color, and this is a really we didn't talk about color, but it's a really beautiful garnet color wine.
Yeah, nice call there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, speaking, I think we may have touched earlier about grapes like Limnio, and so moving along, but still staying in Macedonia. Moving on to wine number 3. Jeff, do you want to take us through this wine a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So Limnio's, we have a long history with Limnio, with Ancient Wine Guys. This is actually our very first event that we did. Some of you may have attended one of our live events. They've obviously been on hiatus a little bit with the everything going on over the past few years. We've had a couple recently. We'll talk about that a little bit with the last 2 wines, one of those events. But our very first event was called a Tour of Wine in the Ancient World, and we started out in kind of early origins, Georgia, and a little bit in Turkey and Armenia, and kind of worked our way westward. And one of the wines we featured in that was a wine T mentioned, the Portocaras Limnio, actually. And the reason we featured it is it's by some accounts the earliest known named variety in the world. Homer, Hesiod, and other ancient Greek authors actually mention wine from the island of Lemnos. They call Lemnian wine. And this grape, Limnio, has been found on Lemnos, and so it's presumed that they are referring to this grape variety. It's not grown much on Lemnos now, at least as a single variety. It's mostly on the Greek mainland, on Macedonia and in Thrace, Chalkidiki as well. And so T mentioned, the kind of wine that was being produced in the 70s with the kind of Greek wine revival, and Portocaros was at the forefront of that. Was introducing a really, it brought some good components with it as well, but a modernization of the Greek wine industry and kind of what we would consider kind of an international style. So that involved a lot of cleaner wineries, which was a really good byproduct, but also involved a lot of new oak, in particular, and just kind of a fresher, sort of fruitier, accessible style, which was de rigueur at that point. But so that Limnio, it was called Limnion. That Limnio, we really love that wine, but it was completely different from this wine, which is done in a really different style, completely non-interventionist, biodynamic winemaking style. So no sulfur, no filtration, no fining, anything like that. So a little background on the winery itself. This is a collaboration between two brothers, Pericles and Stergios Tatsis. Their family's been making wine for over 100 years. They were actually kind of I guess refugees from northeastern Greece, and were forced to settle in this area of Macedonia. And these two brothers picked up winemaking in the 90s, took over their family winemaking heritage in the 90s, and have actually been on kind of the leading edge of biodynamic or organic winemaking in Greece. Some of the very first winemakers to do this completely non-intervention biodynamic style. So again, Limnio, it's mentioned in these ancient authors, is often described as having a bay grape kind of quality to it, herbal quality. So bay grape, sage, laurel, which is, if you know anything about Greek history and Greek mythology, is a really important component of kind of celebrating heroes and poets and whatnot. It's kind of an interesting aside, but actually in my Latin class today, we were reading a poem by Horace, and he invokes the muse, as he often does in his poetry. And the poem is actually, it's Horace Ode 3.30, and he's actually talking about, he's kind of asking for his poems to live forever and celebrating the fact that he thinks they will. And we always kind of think that's interesting, right? When we're reading ancient literature 2,000 years later, and this is a primary concern, I think, also of modern artists and musicians and creators, is there's a desire for longevity and for posterity to appreciate what you've accomplished with your art. But it really, it kind of comes into play with wine as well, where there's an idea that if I create something great, it's going to last for a long time and be appreciated later on. So it's kind of a nice aside. And that Hesiod was the author we featured in the write-up as being the kind of primary source for these 9 muses is also interesting. He mentions this grape. He mentions Limnio. So yeah, it's from Central Macedonia. I think it's gravel and sand, mostly on the soils. Let's see what's in the glass. It's really kind of an interesting color. It's ruby. It's got that. We noticed this before with the Limnio. It tends to fade. The color tends to fade pretty quickly. I don't have very much in my glass, but very much like a Nebbiolo grape. And then obviously Mavro is the other one that famously does that. Fades out really quickly. So you guys who have more of it can repudiate that. But to me, if I remember correctly, and from what I have now, it tends to have that quality. You mentioned the bay grape has really good, I think a really great balance of acidity and tannin as well. It's kind of got a lifted feel with the acid, and then a really nice long finish with the tannin. Get a lot of red fruit like we had with the other ones, kind of cranberry, cherry, raspberry, strawberry, And I think one thing we've noticed with a lot of these, by a lot, I mean, I think we've tried 4 or 5 Limnios that we've worked with at this point, which is quite a few actually, considering how many there aren't that many out there. Notice the spice, there's a lot of like baking spice, but not kind of oak imparted baking spice. So like kind of naturally part of the wine, like a cinnamon, maybe a little bit of clove, which is cool because it's just part of the profile of the wine. This one, I think it's no new oak. It's all old French oak. Yeah.
I definitely remember on the, I think was it it might have been our Demeter club from last year. We had the Anatolicos Limnio, that some of you might remember. And that wine I think was maybe on the a little more on the darker spectrum. You could see a little bit more of that kind of bricking around the edge, as we'd say. But the through line for me between those two wines is like they're like totally in line with you, Jeff. Like there's this kind of like spice and kind of like light, kind of like herbal aromatic quality to it, and a lot of red fruit. But there's a little there's like a little wildness in this grape that I always really like. There's always something that has a little bit of that kind of like it's not quite feral, and it's not quite like fully rustic or barnyard or anything like that, but there is something that this maybe forest floor sort of like more earthy tone that I think that runs through this grape for me, that it makes me want to try more and learn more to really kind of get a sense of what the personality of the grape is.
And it definitely has more body than compared to the Maschomavro we had earlier.
For sure, yeah.
And one thing I noticed too about Limnio, I agree with you. It always has that kind of wild, rustic, I think, quality.
Yeah, that's a term I always come back to. Yeah.
Yeah, and all the Limnios I tasted, I feel like could use a little decanting. It likes air. Yeah. All the ones we tasted.
I agree. This is definitely a wine that when we first popped the cork on it, and right out of the gate, there was that moment of like, whew, okay, there's a little I hesitate to use the word funky or anything like that, but it was like there's a little bit of that kind of like musty rustic quality to it. But that is something that when you get that in a wine, your first instinct typically in my recommendation would be to decant it, give it some air, let it breathe. Something's that it's been under a cork, it's been all kind of bottled up. The oxygen will kind of let the wine relax a little bit. Some of those kind of like kind of heavier earthy compounds can kind of blow off a little bit. This is something that we see regularly. And it looks like Mike said this one benefited from opening early as well. And Donna, if you gotta hop off, thanks very much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks again, Don.
Yeah, and we'll put it on YouTube afterwards, so if you want to watch the rest,
absolutely.
I was gonna say too, also a wine that already has kind of a feral quality, and then this wine is done without any added sulfur, any intervention in the winery, so that's gonna increase the likelihood of having that kind of Brettanomyces quality as well here.
It's something that some people are much more sensitive to than others. I'm not someone who ever wants to shy away from when something might have a bit of Brett or not have a bit of Brett. Some of the most famous celebrated wines in the old world, especially like Chateauneuf du Pape, some of the wines from like Pégao, Domaine de Pégao, these are very, very fancy wines, can have some of this Brettanomyces quality. And some people might be wondering what that is. That can be sometimes it can be on a spectrum from sometimes barnyardy to funky to really earthy to mushroomy. It can be on a spectrum because there actually are different species of Brettanomyces yeast that contribute to this. And so it's not something you can really pin down and say 100% that's what it is, because sometimes it can be a bit of a floating point. But I think, some people are very, very, very opposed to Brettanomyces. Some people they get one whiff and they go, nope, the wine's broken, I don't want it, which I think is kind of a bit closed-minded. I think it can integrate into a wine, and it can integrate into a drinking experience into a way that still really shines nicely at the table, that can still, that can still age well in the cellar. Obviously, you will encounter wines if you're someone who plays in the spaces where Brettanomyces can show up in wines. There are wines that that it can be totally out of whack with, but in this case, I think there is a little hint of that, and for me, it presents as a little bit kind of like earthy, rustic sort of quality to it.
And oftentimes when people say Brettanomyces, they don't necessarily mean Brettanomyces particular. They mean kind of almost like a slew of bacteria and other things that are happening that are maybe combining with Brettanomyces.
Yeah, just catching on the chat here, Guillermo says that the nose is much more rustic than the palate on the Limnio. And on the nose, it really seems hot, but it's really not. I've had it open for 2 hours and it's helped a lot. The bay leaf and mushroom notes dominate the palate with some red fruits in a pleasant way. Yeah, I mean, that kind of that interplay between nose and palate, that's also something that I find very commonly with wines that have a touch of red as well. That rustic element where you can smell something, you go like, oh, I don't know. And then you take it, you take a sip and it's magical, it's beautiful. And so I think that's something that, yeah, it's a bit of a moving target. And it always makes me think about wine and how I drink wine when I encounter wines like that. Because you'll find wines that are like, the nose is exactly the same as the palate, 100% integration, and there's no kind of, there's no real kind of, you know, intellectualization you have to do to get from A to Z.
And there are wines that it smells so amazing on the nose and the palate is not
Totally
as great.
true.
I mean, so
yeah. And then Jim,
that's like a flat feeling, right? Where you get that kind of exciting nose, and then you're just like, it's like soda that doesn't have any carbonation or something.
Right.
Yeah. In the worst of cases, yeah. And then looks like Jim chimed in and said that Moschomavro wine goes amazing with kind of lemony sour Greek food. I had it tonight with homemade Greek salad dressed with plenty of lemon juice and olive oil and homemade spanakopita, which I made with plenty of feta cheese. Well, Jim, it sounds like you're doing it right.
Oh man,
plenty of feta cheese, spanakopita. That is 100%. You know, you're on the money. But yeah, actually something with like lemony, you know, something you might consider as like a white wine dish actually goes really well with a wine like the Moschomavro. There's definitely, you know, there's no hard and fast rules about what you can and can't pair. So, you know, to have fun with it, and especially these old world wines, old world styles of wines, they can do really well. You know, having red wine with fish, having white wine with, you know, with meat, that sort of stuff. So definitely don't be afraid.
Yeah, and with this wine, and you guys can chime in as well. I think with this wine, I love the mushroom. I mean, that quality of that really dovetails kind of with the description of forest floor and whatnot. That just something that's kind of like natural, I guess you might say. I mean, it has that feeling. Some kind of any kind of stew, I think, with mushroom in it. I like the idea of this wine with like kind of an epoisse or a rich cheese. It almost has that almost smells a little bit like an epoisse, where like a feral cheese with a little bit of a feral wine, I think is always a really good, interesting pairing. So
yeah, I mean, any excuse to eat a poisse is good in my book. I lived in Burgundy for some months, and the amount of a poisse that I ate is well, I don't know. It was a lot. I'll leave it at that. Shall we? Let's see, the next wine I think is the. We're diving down. Over onto the Aegean.
The Aegean, into the island of Lesbos, which is in the northeast Aegean Sea.
So just a quick introduction here to these two wines. The guys are going to lead you through them, but we recently did an event in Berkeley, actually, with Hammerling Wines, some friends of ours there, and the event was a Valentine's Day event. The history and origins of St. Valentine's Day, and so we had I think we have 8 wines total. I can't remember. We featured 4 wines and they featured 4 wines, but we picked out wines that had a connection with just different stories about St. Valentine, and so, or the different St. Valentines. That was part of the story as well. But as T mentioned, we have one here from one wine from the island of Lesbos, and then one wine from the island of Cyprus. And actually, just interestingly, Hesiod mentions wine from Cyprus in his works and days, which I was just kind of reading up on that today. So an interesting connection when we get to that wine. So I'll let you guys kind of go through these with us.
Yeah, I think for these last 2 wines, we're all just work together on them. Just because they're so interesting, so unique. Once again, we're dealing with a really rare grape, Chidiriotiko, which is a grape that was only found, first of all, very few wineries on Lesbos, actually. I think there's two.
I think 2 wineries.
Two wineries, and this is one of them. And they found this grape in a village kind of in central Lesbos, near the village called Chidira. And so they named this grape Chidiriotiko. Chidiriotiko, yeah. And so
You're not being graded, it's okay.
I am stay after you've had a bottle of it, I think, to you.
So they replanted this grape in actually they got a winery and purchased a winery near the crater of an extinct volcano, and they planted this grape there. And the soils there are high in sulfur and copper sulfide. And as some of you know, copper sulfide is used for a lot in organic farming. It's used as the main spray to stop mildew and some other mildew mainly, but like other bugs and bacteria. So because the soil is so heavy in sulfur and copper sulfide, they don't need to spray at all, really. So this is it's a natural wine for all purposes. Yeah.
In that sense, where I mean, we don't need to dive into what is a natural wine or anything like that. But the winemaker, he does credit the fact that there's so much sulfur coming out of the soil. You know, it's these black volcanic soils, which I think it's also a petrified forest there as well.
There's a petrified forest around there. Yeah.
And it's I mean, they're basically, you know, the vines barely have enough to survive, which if you ever talk to grape growers, they always say you basically want your vines to be like on the verge of death, but like not at death, but close, so that they're struggling. That's kind of that sweet spot where they're really making great fruit. And this is the case. It's kind of a rocky, unforgiving landscape there. That his name's Mavro, and he's he makes 3 wines. They're all made from this Chidiriotiko grape. He makes a white wine, a red wine, and a amber or orange wine, is what he calls it. This is the red wine. So the color, though, you might think I was lying to you, because the color is almost entirely this kind of golden, or deep golden amber orangey kind of color to it. And it's
you wouldn't guess this is 2015, which is only 7 years ago. You would, look at the color. If you were blind tasting this, you would be like, is this you're giving me a 2002, 2000, 3 vintage?
This would be the ultimate, monkey wrench to throw into a blind tasting lineup. Your friends would hate you. It would be very funny. And I'm considering doing it next time we have a blind tasting. But no, this is a wine that also, I think, really, this is a challenging wine. When I wrote about this wine on the email, this was a wine that, when we first got it for the events, it was something I tried and I was like, wow, that is extremely different. It's a wine that shows characteristics of a much older wine. It's in an almost like light hints of like Madeira. You get that kind of like oxidative tone to it. It's nutty. It has this kind of like almost like not like cooked sweet stewed fruit, but like almost like dried raisinated fruits. You get like sultanas, and you get all these sort of things but the sugar has all been sucked out. So it's a nice kind of, dry.
It's not oxidized, but it has that oxidative quality on the finish.
Exactly. Yeah. And but the fruit is still there. And so again, this was something that with decanting, letting it breathe, letting it open up, it's almost a different wine after about 30 minutes, I would say, open or something like that. And for me, on the nose, I get all this like burnt orange. You get a lot of spices, a lot of black pepper, white pepper, pink pepper, all these kind of different sort of savory tones to it as well. Which again, coming from a highly volcanic terroir, it does go back to Etna for me a little bit, because that's my reference point. This is definitely actually the first wine from Lesbos I've ever had. So I'm always kind of looking for a way to not to compare necessarily, but to at least have a reference point. And you get that there's still a softness on the palate, but there's a lot of acidity. It's a very strange wine that kind of I think really again makes you think about what is wine, what is a good wine, what is a wine that is complete, what is a wine that is well made versus and someone's palate could definitely have a lot of different kind of appraisals of this wine. And for me, I think it's really compelling. It's a wine that I basically would drink on its own. I think it's something that it has a kind of a ancient quality to it that I find just really, really, really beautiful. Jeff, what are you thinking? This is probably the first time you've had it since the event. what's your impression of this wine?
It's really tasting great to me, to be honest with you. I don't know if it's the you need to take this wine up to 35,000 feet for a few hours and bring it back down. But I remember, I mean, especially the reaction we had to it at the event. I mean, we all loved the wine, but it was kind of that sort of wine where you open it and you're like, oh, I hope everyone else appreciates this. You know, it kind of has that, it's a little ultra, you might say, a little bit on the fringe of kind of what tastes good to everybody. But yeah, I think it's tasting really great. You guys described it really well. I love this wine as well. I would
I just think it's really thought-provoking, and it's a good wine to try if you wonder whether you like aged wine. Some people like aged wine, some people don't like. If you like kind of more mushroomy, earthy, forest floor, maybe like the smell of a library.
Oh yeah,
you're gonna love this. You're gonna love the aged wines.
Yeah.
But other people might not. And this is actually, for the price, it's a good entry level. And do you like the taste of wines that taste like aged wine? Because this is what, older Barolos, older Nebbiolos, Burgundies taste like.
Absolutely. I've had Barolo and from the 80s, 70s that tastes very similar to this, which is really strange to say. I mean, obviously this is a different wine, structurally it's different, but there are those same elements, which I mean, I think it's just a unique wine. If someone told me this is 2015, I would tell them they don't know anything, but I love being proven wrong. It's wonderful. So
I made that call on the night, and I feel it again too, that the kind of Valtellina Nebbiolo is really is a really good comparison for me with this wine.
So one of the main reasons also that we brought this wine in again for Wines of the Muses was that the island of Lesbos is home to if you've read the write-ups. If you haven't read the write-ups, that's okay as well. We're happy to have you anyways. It is home to perhaps one of the most famous Greek poets, Sappho, the archaic Greek poet. And Sappho, where the term sapphic and also where the term lesbian comes from, she wrote about a lot of love poetry. Some of the first poetry ever expressly expressing love between two women. And so this was something that we brought in for the event exploring the ancient origins of love and Saint Valentine, but also Sappho's poetry was so well regarded, written about for thousands of years afterwards, that it garnered her the name the 10th Muse. And so she was so well respected by Aristotle. She's written about by Plato, so this is something that to be able to find a wine from the birthplace of the 10th Muse, it's quite fitting. And to cap off the discussion here of Sappho and to transition here to Cyprus, the most recent. One of the most recent discoveries from Sappho was, and her only complete poem is the Ode to Aphrodite. Aphrodite's birthplace is the island of Cyprus, where we're heading to next. Grab a little splash here. So the next wine we're tasting is the 2020 Tsiakkas Mouklos Mavro. And as I said, this wine is from Cyprus, from the appellation called Limassol. And Limassol is kind of almost kind of Portugal-looking area of Cyprus. To my eye, at least, it reminded me of a lot of the images I've seen of like the Douro. So you have these kind of steep, almost amphitheater-like vineyards that are on these very kind of sunny, rocky, Mediterranean-looking hillsides. And the grape here is called Mouklos, or Mouklos Mavro, or also Mouklos Ambellissimo, I believe was another name. And winemaking here, very different from any of the other wines that we have tried tonight. I actually had to get clarification on the winemaking from the winemaker himself, Orestes Tsiakkas, because when the distributor tried to tell me, he's like, I think I'm getting this wrong. Let's email the winemaker. And so what the winemaking actually is a kind of complex process called a scaled or a sequential fermentation. So you harvest the grapes, you bring them in, and they inoculate them with a non-Saccharomyces yeast. That means a non-wine or beer yeast, alcohol fermenting yeast for about 2 or 3 days. And they are aiming to have it's a semi-carbonic maceration. If you don't know what this is, it's okay. I'll explain it shortly. To be able to extract only a little bit of color out of the skins at this point, and a little bit of tannin. But the skins are actually very light and don't give much color. So after about 2 or 3 days of these grapes just sitting whole, they're not being pressed, they're just kind of juicing out and crushing each other, on their own. Then they add in more grapes, and they actually inoculate with Saccharomyces yeast. So it's a multiple step fermentation where they add the skins back in and to basically try and get as much color with the least amount of tannin as possible. So you end up with a wine that is trying to, again, capture all of those really pretty aromatics and to have a really kind of light, effortless structure, but something that also you can kind of almost call it a rosé, but it's not a rosé. It is a red wine. They make it like a red wine. The winemaker actually suggests serving it chilled. He says it's one of his favorite wines to have in the summer. You can definitely keep it chilled. And it's something that, again, it's probably, I think, what's the alcohol here? It's like 13.5. So again, it's a standard red wine. But the kind of like roses and floral tones to it. I got like lots of those kind of almost like gamay like elements to it. Kind of shows as like a much lighter and more lighter and more delicate wine, but it's actually got a good amount of body to it.
Yeah, I mean, it really reminds me of like Beaujolais, like just and I wonder, this is obviously very experimental fermentation style, and I think it works really well. I mean, it turned out really well. I think it reminds me of like Beaujolais, but with like a little bit more texture and body to it.
So like, almost like a Cru Beaujolais. I mean, if you've ever tasted through some of the Cru Beaujolais from a producer that has maybe a little bit lighter touch on it, from some of the crus like Renier or Fleury or Saint-Amour, something like that, you could definitely see some comparisons here. I wouldn't put it towards like Brouilly, Côte de Brouilly, because totally different soils. You're not going to get that kind of dark,
or like Morgon, which is really powerful and earthy.
Exactly. Like this is almost delicate, and I think it's I mean, like Jeff said earlier about like a lighter style of red wine, like the Moschomavro. This is a wine that we could drink all day long. I mean, this is something that could easily be a house red for me, just because it can play a lot of roles. And I think about this a lot when buying wine, not only for the club, but for myself or back when I was buying for the wine shop, as I was thinking, like, what is this wine for? And, who is it for? And this is a wine that I could kind of see in a dozen different roles. It could be a hot summer day, hot summer barbecue, and I'm going to 4th of July, and I'm bringing something that it's going to go in an ice bucket, next to the Coors Light. Like, pop it out, it's going to be great. Pour it, drink it out of a plastic cup, or it could be in like a large glass. It's something that's kind of complex. It's something that could be kind of drank on its own. That's something that I just really loved about this wine. It's so versatile.
Yeah, exactly. That's the word I was going to use. The versatility of this wine is incredible, I think.
Yeah, and
you can have it on its own. I think it's great on its own.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it does stand on its own despite how light it is. And but it's it's a wine from Cyprus. We don't see a lot of Cypriot wines. They're not well known for red wines. Actually, they're actually better known for some, I think it's Commandaria is kind of more on like on the sweeter style. But this is a winery that, again, Cypriot wine is not as developed as Greek wine, but still something that we're seeing producers like Orestes Tsiakkas who are kind of taking the reins, and they are using this resource of ancient varieties and making it in a way that's not just heavily oaked, heavily extracted, sort of wines, but these are wines that they fit a purpose, but he's making them, in a way that he feels they want to be expressed. I'm sure you could take this wine and you could probably, let it get to 15% alcohol and like a Gamay, you can let it get really dark and that sort of stuff. But for me, this is kind of perfect.
Yeah. What do you think of this wine, Jeff?
Yeah, I love this wine. I think this was my personal favorite wine from the lineup we had at the event there in February. I love it. I mean, a sucker for these light wines, as you all know, but it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those like bright, juicy wines that given any lineup, I mean, especially as someone who's been in the wine industry for a while, this is a wine that's like, it's an industry wine. This bottle would be gone in the first 30 minutes at any gathering of dorky wine people, just because light reds like this are kind of this sort of sought after commodity typically because of their just pure enjoyable drinkable nature. So,
yeah, and I think it just shows, I mean, it's finesse as well, right? I mean, it's the ability to produce a wine that is not just kind of hitting you in the face, but it has angles, it has a way to kind of get to your heart that's a little bit more subtle. And I think it's a little bit harder to do sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think that kind of brings us to the end of the wine discussion portion of the tasting. So now we can jump into a Q&A here. So feel free to either raise your hands or put something in the chat or
unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself and kind of those burning questions that you've been sitting on. We're happy to jump in and answer. Eloise, looks like you might have a question there.
Yeah, I do. I really liked the wine from Cyprus. That one really jumped out at me. I haven't tried two of them, but because I'd have to drink these wines all by myself, so it takes me a little while. So, but are there ways can we buy more of this wine?
Yes. So these wines are all available. Just as a little like housekeeping, again, the wines are all available, and we can either hold them for you for your next shipment, and
save you on shipping,
or if you're really dying to get them, we can for extra shipping, we can try and get them to you the next couple weeks. We don't have like a set shipping day yet for the next month, but probably be sometime mid-April, mid to late April would be the next shipping day.
There's no hurry. Yeah, I
just
want to make sure it would be still available.
Absolutely,
it is. Yeah,
it is still available.
All the wines tonight are still available.
Yeah, they're available as long as Brian doesn't go down to the locker and drink. That's right. It's a little time sensitive. It sounds like that.
Actually, I had all the remainder of the Tsiakkas Mouklos Mavro here at the house for a couple of weeks after the event, just because I hadn't gotten back down to the locker and to the warehouse, I should say, and to drop them off. And I'm not joking. Every 36 hours, I was like, well, might as well have another bottle of
well, Eloise, don't worry. I was at the locker today to pick up some stuff, and there's definitely a few more.
Keep an eye on him.
But we can definitely get more. So it's available.
Okay, I'll send you an email about it.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Please do.
Thank you.
Could you put the slide for the white wine back up, please?
Sure.
First one. We were too busy eating or drinking and missed it. Okay.
That's a good excuse there, Mike.
Well, we were stuffing our faces while you guys were talking. So,
any interesting pairings, Mike, that you would recommend with what you were doing tonight? I know you always come up with something cool to put with.
I don't know about that, but yeah, last night we had a lobster ravioli with a limoncello sauce, and so it was interesting to taste this. We were like, wow, this would have gone really well with that, So,
yeah.
And tonight we had some lamb from one of the local Middle Eastern type restaurants, and number two, the first red, went really well with that.
Yeah,
the Maschomavro,
right. I mean, basically Mediterranean, anything about Middle Eastern, Mediterranean, North African, Italian. Greece can kind of do it all, and this is what we're seeing at folks were saying about Provence and about Tuscany and about Spain, that they're so versatile at the dinner table. Greece is there as well, and it just it's still like we said in the write-up, it's still kind of shaking off this this Retsina image that when you talk about Greek wine, if anyone who's been drinking wine for more than 10, 15, 20 years would say, oh, I've had Greek wine once, I hated it, and it tasted like pine sap. And very fortunately for us, this lineup perfectly exemplifying that. We're well past that. So
we're really well past that, and because otherwise people would say, oh, Greek wine, that's a table wine that you just blend some Mavro with Cabernet Sauvignon, and that's
Me
it.
too.
You know.
Yeah.
Or I remember once a Greek importer came by to our shop in Berkeley, and he was selling just a pure. It would have been like $35 on the shelf, really oaky Chardonnay, pure Chardonnay, and I'm like, I can get this all around me. Like, you know, like I'm not gonna go to Greece to get oaky Chardonnay.
I mean, not to say that they couldn't do it,
but it's
but-
just like it doesn't fit the
Yeah.
the market.
Yeah.
I would say.
I mean,
Yeah,
they
like-
make great Chardonnays and
Yeah.
all over the
Yeah,
world and
yeah.
that sort of thing. But totally, like I was saying earlier, is like, what is the wine for? Who is it for? What can I
yeah.
do with it? And then when you're thinking about the dollars spent,
Yeah,
you go, okay, $35. I'm like, I can drink, you know, good Chablis. I can drink good, you know,
or I can get that Chardonnay from like, you know, like Sonoma or Napa or something.
Santa Cruz. something
Santa
like-
Cruz.
yeah, there's a lot of options. So yeah, I mean that's I wouldn't say we ever like exclusively go into a wine selection process at Ancient Wine Guys, you know, saying, oh, we only want the strange grapes that nobody's heard of. But more often than not, we find that those wines are the ones that speak to both us personally, our palates, and to our stories. And so there's something that is, I think, just great that, you know, we have such a richness of importers and distributors. Really are who we can thank for this, is the people who are going there and they are finding these wines. You know, I actually was at a tasting on Monday with our Eastern European importer, a great guy named Eric Danch, and he is the one who, if any of you got the wines of Dacia, of ancient Roman Dacia, he was the one responsible for some of those most of those wines actually, and he's over there in Serbia, Slovakia, Romania, you know, everywhere over there, and he's you know, going in the trenches, so to speak, you know, getting trying wines that are, and he tells me horror stories of wines that are just terrible, but then he brings back these wines that are just gems and they're completely undiscovered, and they're wonderful, you know, wonderful works of art and effort that, you know, a lot of times doesn't get appreciated by folks. So I always tell people to look on the back of your bottle every now and then if you're drinking a wine from, you know, not from California, and say thanks to the importer if you know, if you like what you have.
So let me jump in here. This is really interesting. We haven't been to Greece in 30 years plus, whatever. And when we were over there, we had wonderful wine, but every time we asked about, oh, can we buy some of this, take home, whatever, it was always like, no, this bottle gets refilled by the farmer down the road, you know, and there was never an opportunity to either take it home or order it after we got back here, you know. Has this changed significantly, or is that still largely true in Greece? Or
I think it's changed a lot from what I hear from just because I think at that time a lot of people were producing wines that were made for export versus wines that were made to drink in the country. And funny enough, you mentioned Ryan mentioned Eric Danch. One of our favorite wines that we used to buy from him from the shop, it was this liter bottle of just a field blend. And this winemaker was trying to get him to taste other stuff, and he kept on seeing all these farmers going up to this steel tank,
Like
and
500-liter tank,
and just filling up jugs with like white wine. And he's like, what is that?
And the winemaker's like, oh, here is my very oaky Chardonnay and my very you know, extracted Cabernet, and he's like, this is not
what I'm looking for.
What are they drinking in there?
And he's like, oh, that's like a peasant wine.
You don't want that.
You don't want that. And he's like, I want to try that. And he tried that and he loved it. And he's like, I want to bring it over. And the guy's like, I don't even have a wine label for it. I don't even have wine labels or bottles. And he's like, I have a graphic designer. I'll make you the wine label. You get the bottles and I'll bring it over. And the guy got the bottles. It's crown cap, like a beer bottle in a liter. And it came over and it did really well. So I think that kind of, I think nowadays, I think it's much easier to get that type of wine.
The willingness to take a little bit of a risk there is also a little bit higher. I mean, 30 years ago, when someone's like, hey, I'm going to Greece, I don't know quite what the currency is doing. I need to bring back wines to a market that in the United States, let's say, or maybe it's England or whatever they are, but most likely the United States, let's say. And maybe, you know, 30 years ago, people weren't so, educated and developed about in their wine palates. I mean, really, the base level of wine education has skyrocketed in the last, I'd say even 10 to 15
10
years.
to 15 years. Yeah.
And so the ability for a winemaker to say, oh yeah, it's a Malagousia, and people are like, I don't know what that is, but I'm going to try it. And versus, in the 90s, really, I remember hearing so many stories from winemakers saying, look, I couldn't sell it if someone couldn't pronounce it. If someone couldn't say, what the grape was, and say, oh, I've had a Merlot or a Chardonnay or a Syrah or a Cabernet before, that they couldn't sell it. And so the people who were trying to tap into an international market, the grape growers, I should say, and winemakers, they were growing that. And so you had this transition period where there was very little wine coming out of some of these countries for a while that was anything but that. And fortunately, I think we're sort of starting to see it kind of crisscross, where yes, there's still a lot of wine coming out of Greece and even Italy and places like Eastern Europe that are international varieties, as they're called, Cab, Syrah, Pinot, Merlot, that sort of thing. But yeah, so we're definitely seeing the transition happen. But like you said, Mike, that story of Jeff, I think Guillermo says, can you put up the slide of the last wine, please? If you can just go to that one. But the story of someone doing traveling and saying, I had this amazing wine and it's only locally. This is definitely changing. But part of that is just
that's right. Okay.
Yeah, part of that is just the the nature of the like the export market. Now people are learning how to commercialize their wines. And
I think they're more savvy too. I think instead of thinking, oh, well, how do I make a wine that's going to sell all across the United States, all across England? Now they're thinking, well, I have this really cool grape, Maschomavro. I think it's going to really sell well in New York, San Francisco, LA. Maybe it won't sell that well in this other place, but because of price point or whatever. But you know what? Why don't I make a few hundred cases for these specialized markets?
Yeah.
And I already know the importers who work in these markets and can sell these wines.
Yeah. I mean,
we run into that a little bit. I mean, we work obviously very hard to find just the right wine for the particular story, the particular geography, and we ran into a wine we actually wanted this time it was grown on the slopes of Mount Heliconia, which had a perfect connection with the Muses, and it's just not available on the West Coast of the United States. So that may be an area for ancient wine imports to address in the future. But there is, even within this growing market, there's still huge gaps. Things we find the wine, we're like, man, we really want that. We tried it in New York, but we can't get it on the West Coast quite yet. So it's still that's part of the exciting part of Greek wine, is it is still a growing market. There's undiscovered places there, and then there are undiscovered markets for Greek winemakers in the United States. Obviously, if you can't get something in the Bay Area, that's a huge, there's a huge market there as well. So it's always it's a moving target, but it's cool to see where it's going. So,
well, thanks, guys. I appreciate you talking about that.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
Of course, yeah, anytime, Mike.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of put a final period on it, when I think I always feel like a broken record at some of these tastings we do, because I'm always talking about this new generation. When I say that, I don't mean to say like the young kids are great and the old generation is not great. It's really it's about the fact that the new generation has embraced things like for example, like the internet to facilitate sales and export and import. I mean, I talk to importers, and they say, man, I'm trying to get my Barolo producer in Piemonte in Italy to get a phone. I had to buy him a telephone. And they literally are telling me that what struggle it was to buy this winemaker, who they love his wines. His wines are amazing, to get him to have a dedicated phone line, so they didn't have to write him letters to say, hey, when's my shipment coming in? When's my my pallet arriving on the water or off the boat? And so you have like Jeff and I, we do this all the time now. We will message producers of wines from historically or mythologically significant regions, and we'll message them on Instagram, and I'll say, hey, do you guys import your wines here in the United States? How can we get your wines? Your wines are related to Homer or Hercules or the Muses, how do we get your wines? And I just think about how crazy that is, that I can just reach out and talk to somebody from Greece and just, you know, take care of everything.
I mean, and before these avenues weren't open,
Right.
You know, like this level of communication.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
that, so when you're saying, okay, 30 years ago in Greece, someone would go to Greece and they'd say, I have to spend this much money. I'm bringing this much wine over. I got to make some sure bets. And people like Chardonnay, they like Cabernet, they like Syrah. And so I'll get this. And they might try a little bit of the you know, the obscure varietal stuff, but typically it was pretty rare. But now someone says, hey, I really want that stuff, and they can make these business decisions before they ever take a risk on it. So yeah, that's something that it's just the new generation has the luxury of being able to do this, to make these informed decisions. So yeah, so I think
Other questions?
any other questions there? Just any other you know, burning Greek wine questions?
Yeah, so
Mythology?
speaking of Instagram, if you're, that's kind of our, not that we're doing a ton of advertising on there, but we do try to post some content that's interesting and relates to what we're doing. Upcoming clubs, kind of stay up to date with that, or Facebook if that's your thing. And then if you're interested in any of the wines, like the guy said, just shoot us an email and we can work out a way to get them to you, whether it's with the next club or sooner than that, depending when we get down to ship them out. So
Good.
Perfect. Well, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
If you have any friends, family, fellow wine nerds who are into this kind of thing, always, you know, don't hesitate to spread the good word of ancient wine. But in the meantime, we'll look forward to seeing you next time, and you know, just a hearty cheers from all of us.
yeah.
And take care, and until then, and we hope you enjoy. So
You guys do a great job. You do a great job.
Thanks so
Oh,
much, Eloise. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Eloise.
Thank you, Eloise.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Really.
Aloha.
Thanks for joining us.
Agreed. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, Guillermo. Cheers.
Thanks.